Soon we're going to have to be concerned about the machine's state of mind as well. Well, it already happens, Sometimes when I'm really stressed, I think the machine kind of feels it and senses it and tortures me specifically.
So this is funny. So Olga.
Yes.
Welcome to Scholars in Spotlight.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Perfect. Finally, we did it.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right. I actually try to be nice to machines and electronic things, sometimes consciously. It seems a little odd, a little crazy, but what I see happening, what if they actually remember, what have you done to them and how you have cursed them?
Yes.
So I think when they wake up or something, they'll be like, this person was
mean to me.
Yeah.
I think it must be a state of mind that you project towards the machine. But I do find that when I'm anxious or angry towards the machine responds in the same way to me.
That's interesting, because I think just perceiving, time. Mm-hmm. So when you want the things to be done faster,
yes,
you're really focused on how slow the action of the computer or whatever you're trying to get done. And then you get even more frustrated, hence you get even more fixated on that one point.
Yes.
And then it seems like, I think that, this machine is not responding to
Why
me.
do you do this to me?
Yes.
I think it's a way to perceive the world as well, if it spins around you and your own inability to to make it work. But
mobile phones, another machine. You just mentioned just before we started recording that one of the best ways to actually be sustainable about mobile phones are to actually reuse them or inherit. That was an interesting term, inherit it from other people. But that was interesting to me. I mean, why is that? Like, what is the cost of making a mobile phone? Because we consider it literally as a piece of material, which is just go and we have a contract and we just pick it off from the shelf and we buy it and then we start using it, then we get bored and we throw it sometimes, or we just leave it on a shelf and then we go and buy another one. But what is at the back end of that mobile phone? Because I think you have done a lot of research into electronic supply chain and the industry. So it would be good to start from our point of view, where we are benign and we just, think of it as a piece of fruit, which I think has less complications involved. Maybe I'm wrong, but let's just consider it for an example. And how deep it actually goes into the supply chain and the people who are building it. So
it's that's a very interesting and important question for us to understand how the things that we use and that the things that we take for granted every day are actually produced, and the people that are involved in this production. I always like to quote what the company Fairphone, which is a company that is trying to make ethical, sustainable phones, says, which is the most sustainable phone is the one you have in your pocket. So which is a matter of the approach towards the consumption itself. But let's think of global supply chains. How do products and services come to our hands? And their global supply chains are very complex, and we live in a world of supply chains. This is every product that we have next to us has been built through a whole process of locating the production in many different countries, in many different stages, and with lots of people involved. The way that supply chains have evolved in the last 20, 30 years is what we call buyer-driven supply chain, which is the buyer, for example, the brand. If we talk about phones, we talk about Apple, Samsung, Highway. The brands are the most powerful element of the supply chain. There's the one who establish all the conditions as to when the pieces have to be in each stage of the supply chain, when the final product has to come, what is the new design, what is the new characteristic that it needs to have. So it actually has all the power towards the supply chain, but it doesn't have any kind of responsibility or any kind of relationship with the people who produce the pieces, the whole products, who are along the chain. There is no contractual relationship between Apple and the person who actually first mines the tin or the coltan or the gold that needs to go into the product. There's no contractual relationship between Apple, or think of a big retailer, for example, think of Walmart or even John Lewis, the big retailers that have a lot of power over the supply chain, because they are the ones who decide which product, when it has to be in, what's the quality, etc., towards the people that actually do make them. This makes a big void of responsibility. If the working conditions of these people are not determined by the where the companies that actually take the decisions are. This is in the West, where we have protections, human rights norms, we have labor rights, health and safety standards. However, all these rules that apply to the brand don't apply to the workers, because they're not connected legally.
So this is a very visible effect of our globalization, and of course communication links and transportations. You can outsource the labor from where it is cheapest, and where you can actually produce things quicker, on demand. And you can, the example which you gave, that if it's in consumers' pocket, if they can afford it, then it is, sustainable. But the sustainability is completely to do with producing and producing cheap and meeting the demand of consumers. I mean, I don't know. I think even in China or even in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, people who can afford iPhone or whatever. I mean, we shouldn't target one brand. Any phone,
it's
anything.
One of the most dominant brands.
Yes. Or any phone. They are also, I think, disconnected to the people who are building in their own same country. So it's actually less to do with West or East. It's actually more to do with actual brands and the companies and the model which they have and their relationships with their suppliers. So this is a visible effect which I think most of us do understand. Okay, so but what is the fundamental reason which you have found out into your research that companies are actually willing to do it even if there is a pressure from outside in any way? Like, how do they get away by doing it? Because we know it, and you are trying to, somehow work on it, but still, it's happening.
I think that's a very interesting question. How do they get away with it? It's a production model that is based on this transnational relationships in which companies are subject to the legislation, to the rules of the country where they are registered. So these big brands, mostly in the West, and where they operate. So the thing is that, where the companies that operate, that are registered in the West, they don't necessarily operate in China or in Pakistan because they do it through suppliers. So those suppliers are subject to domestic laws. And the labor standards in these countries are not necessarily lower, even though they are in some countries, and they haven't signed international treaties on international labor law, for example. But the level of implementation tends to be much lower. So companies actually take advantage of this gap, this governance gap, the fact that the law applies. That we live in a transnational global world, but we have what we call international law, which is laws that apply mostly within countries and then at a international level, but not at a global transnational level. And this is they're taking advantage of this governance gap. Also in the production methods, we try to understand what kind of the purchasing power of the brands and of the large retailers that buy in bulk is actually constantly looking for a minimization of cost. because there's the business model is make as much profit as possible. And we tend to think of a mobile phone or an electronics product in which you have kind of a stable raw material cost, even though commodities fluctuate quite a lot. But in principle, you have the technology that costs quite a lot to produce, and then it's patented and it's protected by a lot of international rules. And then whenever you need to reduce the cost, it tends to always squeeze labor cost. So labor cost end up being the margin that gets squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And so whenever a buyer or a brand wants to get a cheaper product, it always ends up being labor cost that ends up being squeezed.
So that's why all the pressure is towards the rights of the worker who are working at the distance place. So now, of course, any government can have implementation. So we have, this is a good problem, I think, because we have brands who are multinational, but governments who are very much bounded by their national boundaries. So of course, I mean, even if anything outside of EU, if I'm correct, that government cannot really force someone who's working in Bangladesh, let's say. I mean, what is the main country which actually produces, if we are talking about electronic industry?
Yeah. So you hit the nail in the head, as we say, which is this idea of, can we apply our own human rights laws and labor laws and health and safety laws extraterritorially? This means, can the UK, for example, impose its minimum standards on other countries? And in principle, we can't. In principle, international law does not allow for a country to impose its own standard outside of its own borders. A state has the obligation to protect the human rights of those under its jurisdiction, which is, in the UK, for example, those British citizens or any other citizen that is in the territory of the UK. However, to what extent does the UK has a responsibility towards the rights of people in Bangladesh that produce the products that a UK company actually markets and retails? So this is one of the main battles that we have in international human rights, and one of the main scholarly battles that then end up being a real hardcore problem of implementing the minimum rules that we think need to be part of the production systems. So going back to your related questions about where are the main production hubs of electronics, for example, China is a very big hub. But very interestingly, China is losing some market as well, some ground of labor market attraction, because Chinese salaries are becoming higher, because Chinese society is actually starting to demand better working conditions, not so much openly, because trade unions are not allowed, and they're really persecuted for labor rights, are really persecuted labor rights organizations. But the whole coast of China, that was one of the big hubs of electronic production, has become really much developed. So production is either moving to the rural areas inside mainland China, or moving altogether out, for example, to Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia. We have other big hubs of production in Mexico, and we even have a big electronics factory in the Czech Republic. And this is what is this factory called this company called Foxconn, which is one of the biggest suppliers of Apple, for example. I read an interesting article that called it the Fox at the gates of Europe, because Foxconn sitting just in the Czech Republic. So these are the main, for example, production hubs. However, electronics require a lot of raw materials that are very much linked to instability and social problems and human rights violations, which are the so-called conflict minerals. So tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold are essential for the production of electronics, and they are basically mined in very difficult conditions. And in some of the countries that they're mined, the mining is directly linked to war, conflict, and horrific violations of human rights, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Okay, yeah. So we can see that there's a big violation of human rights clearly going on, and that is one of the big reasons why as you mentioned, China mainland, they are demanding their rights, and so hence they move it from one place to another where people have less power so that they cannot negotiate their right, and then hence the price could stay low. But if we can track, if it is possible, I would love to know that what is a life or a routine of someone or a group of people who are actually working, and why is it, in what way they are not getting their rights, and then how the companies or the supply chain who are in the middle of this process can actually impose what they want and ignore what actually is demanded by the workers over there.
Okay. Yes. So let's think, for example, an example of a factory where screens for tablets are being produced. Think of some factories actually may have several production lines that are for different companies. So not necessarily are they all dedicated to the same product, but you can have different lines producing the screen for Apple or Samsung or HP, for example. Think of the kind of work. The kind of work is a very repetitive work, is very low skill. Imagine just cleaning the screen of a screen, trying to wipe it off with a chemical to make it smooth, to make it shiny, and to do all this under a bright light of to see for blemishes. So this the population that tends to access these jobs is very young population, tends to be teenagers in their very 17, 18. Lots of women is a strong female force. They are exposed to a bright light for up to 12 hours, for example, a day, which there is evidence that after 1 or 2 weeks of being exposed to this bright light, your eyesight starts diminishing. They inhale the chemicals that in many occasions are chemicals that are already forbidden in the West, even though they are forbidden in the countries, in China, for example, but they're still being used, like benzene, which is toxic, creates it directly related to leukemia, directly related to fertility problems in women. These are very young women who end up having really a lot of problems regarding their fertility issues, and of course the repetitive task, which creates strains, repetitive strain injuries, etc. And this flexible force that it tends to be, just, for example, having moved from the rural areas, not organized, not in the big cities with a network. These are people as well that do have strong constraints to send money back home. The families depend on them, etc. They don't have the opportunity. They are not organized. They don't have the opportunity to complain. They don't have the opportunity to even understand their own rights. In some occasions, in some occasions, people are grateful for a job. Doesn't mean that you are that you are actually lucky to have a job. Doesn't mean that you're lucky to be exploited as well. So how do this thousands of these people available for these jobs, and companies do take advantage of this, of the abundant of supply of labor. So, the factories environments tend to be very rigid, tend to be quite an authoritative place. There was a factory in which the manager used to put terrible signs all around that were very intimidating, and there is no culture of organization of labor rights activism, and there's no culture of understanding that that is not a situation that one should endure, even though we're not talking about forced labor in this case. Even though we have instances of forced labor in Malaysia, it was found that there was a great prevalence of forced labor in the electronics industry, but it's disempowering of workers that has become the norm, is the norm. Workers have never been empowered. There's no culture of empowerment of workers. And as I said, a very young force that is also could be quite mobile.
So this is, thanks for actually explaining it in this vivid way, because this is one layer of just one product and the one specific production line which you have explained. And I think this is I think I can understand that this could be happening at a place where they first extract the raw materials. Exact same situation, same conditions, same hierarchy of people trying to control, and managers also come from, I think, the same area, so they are themselves scared, hence they do want to make other people work literally like your animals which you have, which you use for domestication, or I don't know, for ploughing the fields, because your own livelihood is kind of dependent on how much you can make those people work, because system don't really at that point care about that manager, because if you are not generating according to the targets, and I think what I've studied or I've seen in those industries, their targets are very the targets drive how much you are valued. I mean, if you don't meet the target few times, it's get tricky. So that is the layer, and that is one of the reasons why I think next time go to buy an electronic, which is actually great irony of our modern society, that this is what allow us right now to actually communicate. We are using all the electronics, but right now we are still talking about how this problem is so complicated. And I think, but I think I or anyone who's listening to it can actually imagine and empathize with and enhance that how complicated this process is where we are right now, and how are we actually getting and progressing. I think we can be mindful of using our products, but I if I'm right, I don't think this would solve.
I think that is the key actually into trying to revert this approach that companies, big brands are happy to maintain, which is the consumer responsibility. So, you have a choice. You can choose fair trade bananas or not fair trade bananas. You can choose fair trade coffee and pay a bit more or not. You can choose to buy less clothes or more clothes. Well, actually, it shouldn't be a choice of the consumer. We should all have the commitment to try to live more ethically, more responsibly, more according to our own values, but it has to come from whoever holds the significant power in the chain, and that is the big retailers and the big brands, but also states. And states have the capacity to create laws that push for some kind of sustainable production, responsible business conduct. Responsible business conduct can't come exclusively from the consumer, and we can't just leave it to companies to altruistically come and change their own behavior. We need, and this is, from the point of view of an international lawyer as I am, we need the right regulation to go beyond incentivizing better models or beyond incentivizing better consumption. We need to actually make sure that the way we do business is not a way that harms human beings, that the profit margins cannot be guaranteed through the exploitation of people. So this is, I think you're absolutely right when you say, well, what can we do? Because there is some supply of ethical fashion, for example. There is just one company that tries to make ethical phones all through the supply chain, and they even say they can't guarantee that every single part of the chain is ethical and sustainable. But it shouldn't be our decision exclusively. Our own, obviously, position and our own consumption is important, but we shouldn't be the ones having to do this.
So this is very funny, which I've realized that. So there is, in the middle, there's a concentrated network of companies. Yeah. I mean, you can call it whatever we want to call it. It's a supply chain, it's brands, it's buying houses, then it's factories. So and then on the both side are the people who are not organized, and their network is not actually formed tightly. They're disintegrated. And on that side of the position, where you can call it the people who are actually producing it, making it, and being forced to meet certain targets on the expense of their own rights. And then on the other side, the factories are actually telling them that, oh no, we are producing it for the people, and then saying it to the consumers that, oh, it's actually, you are powerful and it's for you, and you are the ones who are using the products. Hence, on both sides, they are actually being exploited at some level. Even the buyers, I can see, feel guilty most of the time. We want to be ethical, and sometimes we want to do something about it, but ultimately we feel that the power is in the hands of the buyers. Although with certain technology driven environment, you have so much pressure, and then the companies who don't have certain kind of electronic devices would not survive in that competitive environment. Hence, they are just now forced to buy certain things from very specific brands. So it is crazy that what appears to be the model which is driven by buyers, and the buyers are feeling somehow that they have some sort of influence. They don't really have, because they're not organized at all. They can have. If they, for sure, somehow there's an NGO or an organization which can pressurize, as you are saying, the governments to actually not allow the market to run rampant and to actually create their own rules. Because I think this is one of the points which you mentioned, that the market is competing without the boundaries. And everywhere you can see that markets are somehow competing in a very harsh and without checked boundaries. So market are now driving, I think, every aspect of this conversation, because what matters is, we have to produce. What are you, if we say something about this thing, it would be like, oh, are you against progress? This is something which comes a lot. But that is because we have all accepted the rules of market, which came out of this crazy competition. Hence, why even we are doing it? Why are we actually progressing if it is not for the consumers and the people who are actually working? So what is it about anyway?
Agreed. And interestingly, in the 1970s, when the trying to see what the role of corporations was and how corporations started becoming really powerful and even having political influence in some places, being used in the context of decolonization and the liberalization of trade at the beginning, etc. An economist called Freeman, he said, well, the only role of corporation is to make profit. The only social responsibility of corporation is to make profit. So corporations are not, substitutes for government, and they're not, shouldn't be like some kind of benefactor of our society. However, we've progressed until now, and we're in a kind of quiet revolution now, we've looked at how we can apply international law to corporations, how we can apply human rights to corporations. States are right now arguing whether we can have a treaty to regulate corporations. But I think one interesting progress is a scholarly debate starting on the purpose of corporation. What is the purpose of a corporation? If until now we thought the purpose was simply to produce benefits, to produce capital, to produce, and that way automatically we understand it produce jobs, and jobs then produce more wealth, and more wealth make societies advance. Is it time to actually think of what is the purpose of a corporation as an organ of society? Is it beyond this kind of the organic production of wealth that we hope will somehow trickle down? Or is it actually being part of society in terms of being accountable to not only its shareholders, but to the stakeholders? This is to the communities they're in, to the people that to their consumers, to the workers. So going beyond a corporation being exclusively a production of wealth, and let's hope that that works out to the benefit of most people.
So I would just go on this just a little bit in this direction about superorganisms and how these entities are formed, and then come back to the supply chain, just because there's an interesting research done by this astrophysicist who his name is Jeffrey West.
Okay.
And he does this research on complexity of organisms, organic organisms. That's how he started. So he is an astrophysicist who then converted towards researching about biology and he found these scaling laws that when mammals, let's say mouse or anyone, when they scale up, because we found mammals in every size, blue whales, everything, but they found that how they scale up has a very specific rule to it which governs their size. So everyone has nearly similar heartbeats. So small mammals will have faster heartbeats, and then the biggers would have smaller heartbeat. And then when these scaling laws are actually governing everything, whatever life it is, that has a power of 4. Somehow it's like if they grow, there is a saving of 0.25% in their metabolism. Okay. So somehow like it's an efficiency thing. As you grow bigger, you save more on your metabolism. Hence, you require less food and you live longer.
Okay.
So then he wanted to see that the cities follow the same kind of rule. And then he found, indeed, they do follow pretty similar kind of rule. Like they have networks, how we have networks, and individual cells have to get oxygen. We have roads, and everyone has to have, somehow networks. But cities actually save less than the organic organisms. They'd save 0.15% on their increase, but they still save. As the city gets bigger, they have less things, but the pace, that's the difference. The organic organism, the pace of life as they get bigger is slower, but for the cities, pace of life actually gets faster. Hence, he explained it that we are building synthetic cities, and in these cities, one of the main thing is these companies and organizations which are actually producing these opportunities for us to grow. And the model is getting faster and faster and faster. And it's driven by this growth model where we are competing against each other, and then we want to grow further. And it creates good and negative aspects, or bad, or whatever you want to term it, equally at a double rate. So it's like you hope that you go towards one human rights, or you go towards market, as you're saying, redefine what cities are, and that what becomes the feedback loop of that city or that organism. But he is actually also on the basis of astrophysics and maths and fundamental laws describing what a city and companies are governed by and what are we governed by. Hence, if we understand that there is a mindless growth in our cities, which we have taken from our organic model, and he's explaining that there's a fundamental flaw in this kind of a model, which we are watching right now in a very specific level. So I know that this is all what I said. It's like abstract. It's like what is going on? Like there's just so many examples. But I actually wanted to say all this to bring to this one specific thing. One of a very specific example of this mindless growth and a fundamental flaw we have is that it grows forever. The cities grows forever if not redefined or checked or somehow reorganized. And one of the example is this model of our supply chain, which we just described, that our cities and companies are growing mindlessly and gaining more and more and more power. And the people around the supply chain who are a bit further away are suffering also pretty much mindlessly, and they are suffering and they are being targeted by this growth over here directly, pretty much. So coming back to now supply chain, as you mentioned, I think that is actually the perfectly right time if people from all the other subjects and places are trying to redefine the actual reasons and the laws and the meaning of what these organizations are actually about.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I hadn't, I didn't know this theoretical approach, but it's it's fascinating. I think we are at an interesting time now of redefinition. But we've had this, kind of history repeats itself as well in terms of like we focus on certain social problems and others remain obscure. And while we are, now we have these new threats coming, the moment we kind of try to solve through this reorganization that you've described, for example, we try to solve some human rights challenges, we're going to get the next one coming. And this, for example, we're talking about automatization, robotization, etc. To one moment in which I had a conversation. I was in a conversation with some representative of the industry, and they were telling me, well, all this is not going to matter because these people are not going to have jobs anyway in 10 years' time. And I said, well, let's make sure that in these 10 years we're not exploiting them, and we'll. At the same time, let's worry about what's going to happen to societies when they stop having this access to these cheap jobs and these flexible jobs and low skilled, and what's going to happen when we really need much level of skill jobs to make certain the robotics and all that, and then we won't need so many of these other jobs, and these people may find themselves in a situation in which they definitely do not have jobs. Let's make sure that in the meanwhile we're not kind of exploiting them. So yes, I think it is an interesting point of like, do we have time to reorganize it before it kind of reorganizes itself through another input, technological input, or even, environmental input, in which, it makes it very difficult to work in certain places of the earth. They're very difficult to live and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it can reorganize itself because our markets are built on this evolutionary model, which is like a game theory. If you build something based on these 4 laws of adaptation and evolve, and so it actually just protects itself. It acts as an evolutionary kind of force which somehow anticipates, sees, and readjusts and try to survive, because it is useful. It's been useful to build companies and make these great advances, what we call it, great advances. But I do agree with one of the points that there's whatever I've tried to look at and researched, there's a big chance, pretty high chance, of most of the people who are working this low skill level jobs to might not have jobs. But that is a very funny approach to say that, let's just not worry about it right now. Because if you are not worried about right now, and then afterwards they don't even have a job, means they are nearly irrelevant. Right now they have at least some power, because factory needs them, because if they all go out, the production line would stop. Imagine if they are not even needed at all. Like, they are irrelevant. That doesn't even matter.
Yes.
What is done with that? So if you are not building certain rules, or if you are not working towards what's happening to them right now, when they have some negotiation power, how would you solve the problem? And it would become even more complicated. I mean,
and I think, and we've chat about this before, this idea of like, if they weren't doing this, they'll be doing something else. Like, if children weren't working in the factory, they'll be in the street begging, or they'll be subject to prostitution, etc. Or if these women weren't being trafficked into the West to work as domestic workers, they'll be being trafficked for prostitution or something like that. So it is this the lack of value of attaching value to a human being, as if a human being is a commodity. And this is the main one of the main approaches to studying forced labor, the so-called modern slavery and human trafficking, is how the commoditization of humans, and how humans have become as cheap or even cheaper than other products that are part of the transnational illegal networks, etc. It's cheaper to have traffic a human than it is to traffic drugs, for example, to traffic weapons. And so is this disregard for the dignity of human beings, which is very dangerous. And this is why we continue to need international human rights, because international human rights, the basis of international human rights, is inherent dignity of human beings. It is people don't have rights because states give them rights. People have rights because they're born human, and humans inherently have human dignity. So this is why international human rights law is still relevant in this. If we think that these big organizations transform themselves and through the impact of external events and its all internal reorganization, I think an element that we cannot forget is the power of regulation and law. This is of human beings creating the rules for all of us, which in this social pact that we've established ourselves, which is follow the law that we create in order to continue to protect human beings.
Yeah, I mean, for sure we have a problem of overpopulation, definitely, and then that's why we are getting exploited. Then there is another problem which we mentioned, is about not having a protective body which consider humanity as a global identity. But of course we consider the companies and the governments as one of the governing power. Hence, if you are out of that boundary line, you don't have those rights. I mean, if you don't have the right identity, you don't have those rights. But the companies don't really care about that, because they are only responsible in those boundaries, hence they go out. So it's like a misalignment with globalization and not being able to, on a human level, understand and empathize and consider ourselves as a global identity, not in a way that, oh well, not in a, I mean, not in a way where we are really competing somehow against companies, or now like this is our side, like we are now human versus robots, or not again same traps of in group and out group sort of conflict, but really understanding, as you said, the basic human rights in our transforming world, where in some time governments and nationalities would be irrelevant, no matter how much you want to stick to them. Because this is actually one of the examples of it. It does, I mean, it really, what we are heading against right now is that the model of government and national identities is not working here, because there is a big distance between those governments and those individuals who are working in that particular environment which you mentioned, with bright light, or there are kids who are working with different kind of injuries. Maybe they are working with different kind of stress, which is could be a traumatic stress, but they are just they have to go there every day and they just have to work. So ultimately, we can call it modern slavery. It does look like modern slavery, but we cannot solve it, because we are still stuck with our model of government and national identities and human rights based on very specific boundaries. Hence, I mean, we would really have to somehow transform and actually go beyond our model of human right derives from our identities. And as you said, it has to really be a human international rights approach, which somehow transform this thing.
Yeah, you think about in terms of in international law, or international human rights. Sorry, is a very young legal system in terms of in comparison with international law in general, with which is the way the states have been regulated themselves for a long time. International human rights law as a legal body grows out of the Second World War and the attempts at the Second World War to not repeat the atrocities that happened during the war, and to actually create an international society that has those values as its heart. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is only from 1948. So it's yesterday in international law terms. So this is the question is this system of human rights protection still valid when it was created for a world in which there were very few states, because most of the states were still under colonial rule. Therefore, there was a very small and tight group of states that were kind of quite culturally similar, because political systems and kind of social religious traditions, etc., and creating these rules that always preserved their main interest, which was the sovereignty of the state. In principle, human rights was something that states could kind of control within their borders, and this links with what we talked about, the extraterritoriality before. So we live in a different world in which maybe states are not the most powerful agents anymore, or at least not all the states, and in which human rights are concerns of no longer a domestic or a concern, but also an international global concern. Do we have the right tools? Do we, the over-reliance on states being the one who create the norms, and corporations, for example, not being the recipients of these norms, of these human rights norms, individuals not having their power to challenge non-state actors such as corporations. Is this still a valid legal model to protect human dignity, if human dignity is what this is at the heart of the legal model, and we assume it is at this moment? So we need to think about to what extent the tools that we have are valuable, still valuable for the challenges that we face. And in principle, the basics are this idea of human dignity, the idea of universality, all the rights for all the people, the idea of interdependence. Every right is dependent on the other. You cannot have, a right to demonstrate and to vote and to choose your political leaders if you can't eat or you don't have shelter, or your children are dying of diseases. But on the other hand, if you don't have the right to demonstrate and vocally challenge your leaders, your situation is never going to improve. So the interdependence between social, economic, and civil and political rights still valid as the basis of this legal system. And so universality, interdependence, and interrelation of all these rights. So the basics are still valuable. What might be challenging is the instrument itself.
Yeah. So, I mean, all these. First of all, I think most of us don't even realize that how bad the situation is, to be very honest, because, well, that's when you go there and then you research something and then you realize, oh, well, the slavery does exist. Like, seriously, sometimes it's indirect, as we have mentioned. I don't know, maybe is there another example where the slavery is very direct? And I mean, these are the people who are somehow forced by their environment, and hence they are now choosing to be this kind of modern slave. But is there
Yes, there is, definitely. Let's think, for example, of the fishing industry. Let's think of the seafood industry. This is a big scandal several years ago, and in Thailand, seafood vessels would literally have Burmese migrants chained to the boat for 3 years in the middle of the high seas, where they were compelled to fish every day, non-stop for 3 years, to pay the debt for having been given the job, for example, or they've been trafficked or captured, and they would just stay in the high seas, and the ships would come to pick up the seafood and bring them back to shore. These people never they were never free for like 3 to 4 years. This was a common occurrence for a while. Most of the seafood that you would buy in a British supermarket came from Thailand, so therefore with a high risk of direct slavery.
And I think I remember one of the examples with the prison manufacturing. I mean, how the companies outsource to prison? I mean, what would you classify it? What is this model?
Prison work is according to the International Labour Organization, prison work is only allowed if it gets remuneration and if it's voluntary, in terms of, like, the inmates actually want to access it. Think that forced labor is a labor relationship in which the person that is being forced has no capacity to either deny entering into the relationship or leaving the relationship. It could be that you entered voluntarily and then you can't leave the relationship for many reasons, from your documents being taken away to a coercive situation, that threats or to yourself or your family, etc. Debts, etc. So prison labor is in many places still it's not a voluntary relationship. relationship in which the inmate enters voluntarily into. So there's still as well labor camps where people are put, re-education camps in which people are put to work, etc. We have the example in China of Muslim minorities, which are actually put in re-education camps, which are labor camps, etc. So yeah, prison labor is regulated in international labor law, but it's still very prevalent. But in principle, if you as voluntarily you want to participate, you obviously don't have as much leeway into establishing the terms of like the prices or the lead times or your supply or the who you sell to. But it's perfectly regulated in many Western countries.
So, I mean, this is so fundamentally we are looking at economic and welfare prosperity of large number of population who are actually just looking to feed their family and earn something which is just a little bit above, or not even above, just barely fulfilling their basic human rights.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, they get exploited.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're looking at a large number of population, which gives organizations loads of power to exploit them, because there is not endless, there's a lot of people who are willing to take that work if someone's, threatens to leave because they are not getting right amount of care or right amount of salary. And then we have a misalignment with our market structures, who are mostly driven with the competition between each other and to provide consumers so they can earn the highest amount of profit, hence not caring about what the human values are, because the markets has been driven for so long, and we as human ourselves are competing and trying to improve against each other for now centuries and maybe thousands of years. That somehow we are now a global society, hence forgetting in that huge collaboration that what our values really are. And now the geographical boundaries and the old limitation which might have checked certain societies to really see if they are going right or wrong is now covered, by actually going from one place to another and avoiding those limitations. So which gives us a lot of opportunity to grow.
Mm-hmm.
But it also creates a lot of problems. Now, jobs, as in like this is all. I mean, at the base of all of it is that humans need to work so that they can earn, and that was possible. Well, that was necessary before we created these great factories which somehow create wealth. Let's say if we assume that they create wealth because they are producing, and before that humans really needed to hunt or really needed to do agriculture if they wanted to eat. But that's where the jobs come from. That's where our sense of identity comes from. So now we do need to have jobs so that we can earn, and those jobs are no longer individual going out and hunting for themselves or going out and hunting for their tribe, but we work in a university like right here, and then you're teaching people from all over the world.
Yeah.
But it's a completely different example because you're adding value and everything, and you have a lot of power. But then there are people over there who are working directly, as we are mentioned, in industry, but we also need to treat them as human, as we should treat someone who is working as our colleague.
Yeah.
But that is a huge gap, because they are working to literally feed themselves and their family and to get by.
Yeah.
And adding value into the society is it's not what the main motivation is. But the human right aspect and also the value, how society value, I mean, how you said that we are fundamentally disoriented in that aspect, that we look at everything. We would look at a tree and see what is the value of this tree in our economic model, and then we will rate it and we would leave it there, or we would extract something out of it. So ultimately, I mean, this is a very complicated problem. Already I can see that there's no way I can go anywhere from this point on. But if we can actually somehow work towards a model which a lot of people are looking at, where the requirement to feed at least, or basic shelter, would not be that elementary in people's life, some sort of national basic income, where automation would actually increase the economic value and would generate profit, and certain redistribution would allow these people to have their dignity to themselves just at a basic level. Do you think that would help in any way? I mean, what is the role of jobs? Because that it seems like that jobs are like at the core of being exploited, and then human rights.
I think that there's several very interesting points there. One of the things is this, the way we've classified some jobs as adding value whilst others don't, in terms of, why have we classified some jobs as low skilled, as interchangeable? Why can any person do the cleaning of the screen, whilst only someone like you or someone like me can do the jobs that we do? To what extent have we fallen prey of this idea of some jobs are just interchangeable, so are the people who do them. So I think that's a big that is a big issue that we need to resolve. This idea of low skill, therefore not valuable. Well, if those people weren't doing those jobs, you wouldn't have the microphone that we're using now, so your job wouldn't be able to be done. But on the other hand, I think very interestingly, this idea of what is the minimum that society requires, and this was already in the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, and in the subsequent covenants that developed it. So in the Article 11 of the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, talk about the right to an adequate standard of living. So we've already enunciated what it is. What is an adequate standard of living? We do have this concept of there is a minimum to fulfill human dignity. So adequate standard of living includes shelter, includes food and water. So we have the instruments. We just have to use them, and we have to put behind them the priorities that they have. The priority of states to develop the international legal norms, and to actually subject all of those that could and do impact on people's enjoyment of their own rights. It's no longer the state that is the major force that may determine how a human lives. It's also all these other non-state actors, in particular corporations, as we've been talking. So let's use the instruments that we have. Let's use international human rights and the concept of inherent human dignity to be able to shape the way we work, we live, we interact, and we care for others.
Yeah. So that's one of the only ways forward. Definitely. Do you want to talk about your book?
I want to thank you for bringing that up, because I do want to mention the book, because I want to make a tribute. So the book War, Conflict and Human Rights, which third edition came out at the beginning of this year, at the end of last year, is co-written with Professor Chandra Lekasriram and Johanna Herman. So the three of us wrote this book several years ago, so it's a third edition. And I just want to use this time and this moment to pay tribute to Chandra, who very sadly and unexpectedly passed away at the end of 2018. And Chandra was a force of nature. She was an absolute amazing scholar, an absolute amazing person, and I owe Chandra a lot. I owe her who I am as a scholar. I owe her, I think, what I know as a researcher and as an academic and as a female academic. And I just wanted to mention the book because I think it's a great contribution to the understanding between of the place of human rights in the context of conflict and post-conflict reconstruction, and the way societies have to deal with the present and past violent and the legacy of mass atrocities. And I just think it's a valid book still, and it's all due to Chandra's vision and Chandra's work. So thank you for allowing me to say it.
No, of course. But do you want to, I mean, that's great. That's brilliant. I mean, do you want to define, like, maybe summarize the...
Yeah, well, we do. The book is now become a textbook in terms of like it is also thought for teaching as a teaching tool, and in there we explore this causes and consequences of conflict in terms of human rights violations, and what are the international tools to address the legacy of violence. And I think just basically we try to keep it updated every 3 years, and not just say we're working on the next edition.
Okay. Anything else would you like to mention? Yeah. Thank you so much, Olga.